Thanks for the introduction, and thanks all the organizers for this opportunity. There have been very intense days, the past two, and in which I have learned a lot about novel proteins, and hope to be able to provide you with a new perspective, new food for thoughts about methods for assessing social impacts of novel foods and alternative proteins. And I will introduce you methods which I think might be known for most of you, which is part of the family of the life cycle methodologies, and it is called social life cycle assessment. And so I will guide you a little bit in understanding what social LCA is about, how it works, why we need to adopt a life cycle approach also for addressing social impacts. And then I will move to the discussion on what application of this method entails in the field of innovative products, innovative food system, and novel proteins. And we will see that we need somehow to do some adjustments, some further developments, and in which directions. And then I will have summarized some takeaways that I hope might be useful for our discussion later in the panel. So to start, what social LCA is about. First of all, social LCA is a methodology. It's similar to life cycle assessment that we just saw before with Serenella and Anna. And as a methodology, it aims at assessing the social, the positive and negative social impacts and also risks of products or systems, taking into account the whole life cycle. And the ultimate goal of this methodology is the one of improving the human well-being and human dignity. So this is the overarching goal that we try to achieve. And social LCA is able to deliver quantitative results. So this, I think, that is a major difference compared to other social-related methodologies. But they can be also semi-quantitative or qualitative, depending on the level of information available. And the good news is that the methodology has been recently standardized. We have a standard for social LCA, which is the ISO 1475, that's been just released in October this year, so very fresh. It was pushed by strong industry demand for methodology for social assessment of products. But the developments of the methodologies date back in the late 90s, where first scholars started to investigate how the life cycle concept could have been applied also to social dimensions. But it is only in the around 2010, 2011 that we had the first guidelines for social life cycle assessment. They were developed under the umbrella of the United Nations Life Cycle Initiatives, and more recently, in 2012, these guidelines have been strongly revised, improved, reshaped, I would say, completely. And you can find them, they are publicly and freely available for supporting the application of the social LCA methodology to products. And of course, there is an ongoing quite intense research in the field, so you will see a raising in publication of social LCA applied to products. As you can see here, I've tried to summarize the main characteristic of the methodology, just to understand also main differences compared to techniques and approaches you might be more familiar with, and you will see there are several similarities. First of all, social LCA is strongly rooted in the concept of stakeholders. Stakeholders are meant as a group of people that can be affected by the introduction into the market of new products, new technologies, or simply can be affected by the behavior of organizations that manage product and system. And typically in social LCA, we deal with different categories of stakeholders. They include workers, society at large, consumers or users, small-scale entrepreneurs. We have also children. We have value chain actors, many of them, as you can see. And we consider them all. Another key point is the life cycle perspective. I don't think that I need to add more about this because previous speakers already very well clarified and highlighted the value of the life cycle concept. So the main idea is that we consider not only what is under our control, but we consider also what we call indirect impact. So those happening far, far away from our area of concern. And other important characteristic already explained is the capability to identify trade-off, which is absolutely key because we need to avoid those that have been called as the regrettable substitutions. So that is a very important point. And with this life cycle approach, we can see the full picture of a system and understand how it might evolve. And last but not least, social LCA, as you can see, it's a very context-specific type of assessment. It means that the social impact, a specific social impact, such as I bring the usual example of the child labor, is perceived differently according to the context. So there's no universal results about or perception about some social impacts. And when I talk about the context, I mean not only the geographical area in which we are establishing our supply chain, our value chain, but I'm talking also about the cultural value. I'm talking about behavior of people. I'm talking about political actions, socioeconomic conditions, so everything that affects our decision process as a human being, and everything that affects the building up of our values. At the beginning, when I introduced the methodology, I said that it assessed both impacts and risks. I think that is worth explaining a little bit what we mean with risks, because it might have a different concept compared to what we have been discussing in these days. When we talk about social risks with social LCA, we refer to the likelihood that something of negative might happen, not in strictly statistical terms. So we focus then only on negative issues mainly, and so we refer to damages, injuries, losses, and the purpose is to identify how to prevent them. So this means that risks can be identified by collecting also what we call primary data, so investigating what is happening in a specific situation, so collecting real primary information. But risk can be identified only relying upon well-established statistics at the national level, country level, or sector level when we don't have any idea of what is happening in a specific situation because the product is new, because the product is still to be developed. So under uncertainty condition, we can use this sort of background type of information. Just to give you a little bit more, is part of the family of the LCA, and as such, it mirrors the structure of the life cycle assessment. You see on your left side that we have the typical phases of a life cycle assessment methodology. So we define the goal and scope, then we define the type of data that we need in the inventory, then we evaluate the impact and we interpret them. But social LCA is pretty much different from LCA. So forget what LCA is about when talking about social assessment in this case. The assessment is carried out according to the structure that you see on your right side. So we start from identifying which are the relevant stakeholders. There are ways for identifying what are the relevant ones. If we don't know, then we take them all into account. And then these different kind of stakeholders might be affected by different kind of social aspects, which in this field are called social impact categories, and there might be many. So overall, there are around 30 different kind of social topics, social impacts that might be evaluated, but there might be much more. You see an example of them. We can have human rights. We can evaluate impact in relation to working conditions, cultural heritage. We can consider discrimination and equal opportunity, but also ethical treatment of animals is a new social topic that has been introduced in the latest updates. We have also fair competition, which is an important topic for actors in the value chain, but also responsible communication that specifically address consumers, and also skills, technology development, and many, many others. So the list is not conclusive, and one of the scary part of those who are dealing with social LCA is that in opposition to what happens in LCA, we don't have a fixed list of topics and indicators. But this is, I would say, it's okay, because social impacts are very much depending on situations, on context of people. So we can't have this kind of fixed list. And this has been considered quite a drawback of the methodology by policy side, of course, that requires to rely on stable and well-defined solution. Here, I just provided an example of one of the possible ways in which social LCA results can be displayed and delivered. This is one out of many, so don't take this as a reference approach. But just to say that you see that there are two rows with arrows in which we have the life cycle, two life cycles. This is, in this case, is a comparison between two different types of systems. And the first one, we have, sorry, it's not very clear, the image, but we have the life cycle stages, raw material, manufacturing, and production and processing. And for each life cycle stage, we have considered, in this case, two different kinds of stakeholders, which are workers and local community, but there might be many, many others. And you see that in each life cycle stage, we have social aspects over there. Some of them are recurring, such as occupational health and safety, or remuneration, or employment, are recurring because these social aspects are those relevant for that specific step of the life cycle, for that specific stakeholder. So you understand what the life cycle means with this picture. And what the social LCA methodology identifies, first of all, that these are the relevant topics for the product system that we analyze, and which ones are the most relevant according to this coloring code in comparison to a reference system. So a reference system means that we are operating according, there's an acceptable situation, we are operating according to standards and guidelines and common ways of practice. When the colors become red, it means that we have an acceptable situation that can or can't be improved, depending on the context in which we are living. And the green one, which is not present in these figures, means that we are performing better than the current situation. So it's a very simple way. This one is absolutely not quantitative, but for understanding where the problems are, which are the most relevant aspects we need to take into account. And this is the basis for defining improvements options. So in a nutshell, I think that it's important to consider these three aspects as the distinguishing features of social life cycle assessment. One is this systemic approach that has been stressed several times today. Systemic approach is given by the life cycle perspective, which means that we look at the product system in its entirety. And this is extremely important because we don't focus only on the end part of a system, which might be the one related to consumer, for example, but we look also at the production side, at the supply chain, at the processing side. And I think that it's important to stress that the way in which we produce something matters a lot for avoiding this regrettable substitution. So it's something that can't be neglected. But then it's also, I think that is an important element to consider that social LCA can be considered really as a sort of umbrella methodology in which other approaches can be organized and accommodating in a way that is consistent and robust. This means that social LCA is fed by input from other disciplines, such as, for example, health and safety type of assessment, consumer science, animal welfare considerations. So social LCA take them into account and put them in perspective according to the life cycle perspective. Last but not least, as is mentioned here, social LCA uses techniques that are also common to other to other social sciences and other fields, such as techniques for engaging with stakeholders. So participatory approaches are key because social impact affects humans, and we need to talk with people in order to understand what are the relevant issues that we need to tackle. And so stakeholders are engaged in different steps of the life cycle assessment methodologies for defining what matters, but also for understanding how the system evolves. So there's a strong focus on co-development of approaches when talking about social life cycle assessment, which is something a little bit that you don't find, for example, in LCA. There's no this kind of need. But when all these applies very well when we talk about existing products available on the market. But what happens when we have new products, novel products, innovative products that are not yet there? The methodology certainly, this requires a challenge for current methods of social assessment, and I would say also for sustainability assessment in general, because we need to introduce this forward-looking perspective. So looking at what will happen in a certain time frame into the future. And because we are talking about products that are not available yet onto the market, we are talking about products that have a different level of technology readiness level, processing. We have discussed in these days about the need to scale up production processes, and this is exactly the point. And we are in a situation in which we have limited data and information. In many cases, we really don't know what is going on. When we talk about novel products, we talk about the possibility that they introduce very structural change into our society. So impact might be large and extensive. So this requires that the methodology as such can't be applied, requires further development that need to take into account all this specificity. And what I will show you is an ongoing work that we are doing in the framework of European projects for improving the methodology and making it suitable for assessing social impacts of novel food products. So I will try to guide you in these slides, which seems to be very simple, but there's a lot inside. So let's try to start with some orders. So first of all, as I mentioned, if you want to set up a methodological framework that is robust and consistent, we need to define the question that we want to answer when we assess the social impact. So this is a question that I pose to you because in these days I've been heard a lot of different views, and I think that it's important that we define first what is the overarching goal that we want to achieve. So what is the goal that we as society would like to achieve with the production of novel food and alternative proteins? And I've heard about the overarching goal of having healthy diets with a focus on reducing environmental impact mainly. Some speakers also talk about food accessibility for all. I would add good food accessibility for all. Others talk about food security. So there are different kind of goals in mind. And the definition of what we ultimately want to protect and achieve, we think that has to be informed by priorities at European and global level. And we have called this priority as social areas of priority, which represents ultimately the fundamental social rights and social objectives that we want to achieve. And here in the upper part, you see what is our preliminary proposal for these social areas of priority that have been informed by the European Protein Strategy, the Food 2030, the Farm to Fork strategies, the SDGs, and many others. These social areas of priorities have been identified in justice, which includes the topic of accessibilities and equalities in terms of good food available for all. Remember that we have a commitment as a society to fulfill in terms of zero hunger for all the people. We have a topic of resilience, which refers to the ability of withstand the magnitude of the ratio of disruptive effect, and also the capability to absorb, to adapt, and to recover from such an event. And this clearly recalls the topic of food security. We have safety and safety of society, which means that these products shall not pose any risks to public health. And we have the topic of innovation or technology development. That means refer to the fact that novel products, novel technologies create opportunity for promoting economic growth and creating new industries and job opportunities and enhance competitiveness by fostering innovation. So these, we think, are the key pillars against which we can define what we want to measure and how we want to measure it. Last point that you see in the lower part of the slides is that we need to consider that we are talking about new products for which information can be scarce. So the approach has to be a tiered approach, so approach that evolved according to the level of development of information for the different TRL. So when we have very low TRL, we have only just concept, some idea. We start by identifying whether our product system contributes positively to these areas of priorities that we define at European and international level. And we try to identify whether there are potential risks which might be related, for example, to the fact that we have some supply chains for ingredients that might be at risk. The more we get information and data about our system, so the more the TRL increases, the more we are able to make the analysis more quantitative and include risk assessment in terms of social risks. We might include the identification of social materiality, so what matters for our system, and we can quantify impact. So this tier approach is really, we think that is functional to the type of assessment. I just give you an example of some of the social topics that might be introduced, might be defined for when applied to alternative protein. As I mentioned, this is not a conclusive type of message, but just a preliminary work. But to see how those social areas of priorities can be translated in terms of aspects that we want to assess. You see that we have different kind of stakeholders here. We have workers, value chain actors, consumers, society, local community, farmers, and we need also others. And the topic that we might want to address that are able to quantify the contribution to those social areas of priorities might refer to, for example, for local communities, inclusive economic growth, improved livelihood and human health. When we go to society, we need to measure the food security, the ethical concern, which are a critical element, and also social acceptance. There are many others. When we go to workers, we talk about the working conditions. This topic was raised in the keynote of the first days. We don't need to forget that we have workers along the value chains we are evaluating, which might suffer for impacts that we are not aware of today. And human health and many other aspects. For consumers, we talk about food safety, nutritional concern, and also consumer acceptance. So these social elements will be further defined, and in terms of indicators we can use to measure them in a proper way and evaluate the contribution to those areas of priorities that we have defined. As last information, these topics have been currently under analysis in the framework of two European projects we are working with, one related to the cultivated meat and seafood and one related to novel proteins. So really hope that we will be able to give a contribution in these regards. These are my takeaways from this presentation of today, which I hope might be useful later for the debate. The first of all is that it's important that we take the life cycle perspective any time that we have a problem and we need to understand how to address it. And the life cycle thinking perspective means that we look at the problem in its totality. We look not only at consumption side, we look also at the production side. We look at each step of the life cycle, considering each stakeholder in every step of the life cycle. So this comprehensive view avoids that we had this unavoidable this substitution that might be detrimental, and avoids that the trade-offs are very well defined and clear, and then the decision makers can understand how to manage them. The second point was also raised by a presentation of Serenella, and if I remember correctly, also by a presentation by EFTA yesterday, that we need to integrate some considerations in the early design stage, including the social consideration, because according to the life cycle thinking approach, if we embed these considerations at the beginning, when we have very limited knowledge, we are able to spot potential risks, and we can identify if the system is going in the right direction or not. So we can adjust it. So it's important that even if we have limited knowledge and data, we start already doing some sort of assessment. And then the last point is that these kind of methods can't work without the support of stakeholders. It's not something that scientists do in isolation on their desk and then go to the public and say, these are the results. We need to engage with stakeholders as much as possible, and we need to have the flexibility of adapting the methodology that we are using today for facing these complex, multifaceted problems, such as the one of novel proteins and novel food that embrace a lot of compartments. Sustainability is, I would say, pretty a correct word for understanding this complexity, but we have also many interlinkages in the system. So we have environmental impact that generate social impact as well. So these kind of interlinkages have to be somehow taken into account, and the methods have to be developed in the direction of tracing them, mapping them, and understanding them. So this is all from my side. Any question, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.